Welcome to the Businessmen and Women of Color podcast. I am your host, Ann Alston, CEO and founder of ALSTNTEC LLC, and it is my pleasure again to bring you quality programs to all of you who's listening today. Today we have a wonderful and inspiring guest speaker who will be talking about workplace health and organization. Before I bring her on, I wanted to take just a minute or two to highlight the importance of having a healthy work environment. Too many of us worry about things on the job that has absolutely nothing to do with us in general. And so most of the time, it is the culture and the multiple people's work ethic and different work styles that clash that cause confusion, drama, stress in the workplace. And so we internalize these energies and we also bring that into our personal lives. So that's why it's very important to start thinking about how we can have a more healthy work environment and a healthy personal environment. So one of the ways that I thought would be helpful is to bring on someone who's an expert that can share with us the tools and resources that we all need to be aware of on how we can promote a more positive workplace. And we definitely need that for both business and personal. So our guest speaker today is none other than Nicole L. Turner, who is the CEO of OVAT Group, and I hope I say that correctly. And that organization is located in Accokeek, Maryland. Nicole is an organization health strategist committed to helping organizations achieve excellence by evaluating missions, goals, plans, programs, business processes, and overall organizational health. Nicole has a strong aptitude for coaching and mentoring during change and mostly advise and consult executive staff on transformation initiatives and change management. And that's just very so important. Nicole also she does a lot of performance metrics and milestones that help organizations strategize their approach to building a sustainable health environment. She is also the author of Detox Your Life, Building a Healthy Relationship with Yourselves and Others. And now she has a new item coming to press entitled Detox Your Organization, a toxic workplace affects the bottom line. That's the name of her new book that's coming out. So if you want to learn how to detox your life and detox your organization, please stay tuned to this broadcast. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Nicole Turner to our program.
Thank you. It's an honor to be on your program. I'm so excited. You're doing so many wonderful things. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you are so welcome. So, Nicole, I am so glad that you're here because I really want to know more about the Detox Your Life because, everybody has a lot of drama going on. I mean, there's a lot of issues, there's a lot of political stuff going on, and we're internalizing all these things and it's getting kind of mixed up. So, how does the Detox Your Life thing works?
So it works first by identifying and recognizing those things that are having a negative impact on you mentally and emotionally. And you talked about politics. Everything that's going on with this upcoming presidential election has so much negativity tied to it. People are fearful of if one person gets elected over another, what does this mean for me? What does it mean for me individually as a woman or a man or as a Black person or minority? There's so many stressors out there. And even when you think about TV, like a lot of the reality TV shows out there now, I don't watch reality TV, but there are a lot of things tied to it that are very negative. And a lot of people spend a great deal of time in front of the television, and there's no way you can watch negative programming or toxic programming and it not filter into you mentally and emotionally. And then just the everyday stress of life. Like my pastor used to always say, many people are one paycheck away from being homeless. And that sounds extreme, but if you think about if you just miss one paycheck, the snowball effect on everything else financially in your life. So just survival in itself is stressful for so many people. And then you factor in if you have to take care of, the elderly, your parents, or if you have kids that are not doing so well and you're trying to get them on the right track, or if you have relationship issues or trying to be in a relationship. There's so many things coming at us, and it's just, it's not humanly possible to be able to say, okay, I'm gonna combat all of this. Even the most positive of people are still impacted when negativity is like pouring into their life. So it's really important to be able to identify what those toxicities are that are impacting your life, and then developing a strategy to overcome them or combat them or make a change or a shift in your life.
That is definitely so true. That what you're saying is pretty much what I was saying in my book as well. Is that you have to take control over what is really affecting you, and all these negative energies that you're taking in, and you're internalizing it, and then you kind of all of a sudden you're thinking the way that they're thinking, and you're acting the way that they're acting. So, how do you get over those things? What methods do you take? And even how do you even recognize that you are absorbing negative feedback to the point that you're detoxing? I mean, you're toxating your whole life, if that's a word. But, for me, that's what it feels like. It feels like, the whole world is just full of toxic energy. And so one of the things that I try to put out there is, to just take a no technology zone, just turn it all off, and make sure that, you give yourself time to kind of be aware of some things. So, so what are some of the major tools that you suggest, from your book on how people can recognize when their world is full of toxicities?
Well, before I answer that, let me piggyback on something you said when you mentioned the no technology zone. I am a big proponent of digital detox. As wonderful as social media is, oftentimes people will look at social media and see what other people are doing, which sometimes is not really factual, but the picture that people paint of their lives leaves some other people feeling like, "Oh my gosh, I'm just not, measuring up, and my life isn't as great as that person's life." And it sends them into a state of depression because
Yes.
they're spending so much time looking at what other people are doing and feeling less than. So
Yes.
I'm all for taking a break. As much as I love technology, I'm all for taking a digital detox because you need to purge from that, because it gives people a false sense of what everyone else's life is like, and leaving you feeling like your life is a mess. And that's not always the case. Oftentimes you're doing better than the people you think are doing so wonderful.
Exactly. But you never realize that because you're so you're engulfing yourself in these things. And I'm gonna tell you where I discovered the no technology zone. When I was going through college and I just didn't have time for TV. It was just one of those times where, you're studying all the time, and then by the time you look up, it's been a month and I haven't been on my cell phone, or I haven't looked at television. And I've learned so many new things, and because I've created a habit, of turning it off, I can now open my mind up to other things that's going on around me, not so much the news, but I can pick up a new book, I can make new connections. And and from a business perspective, I discovered that more business owners, the real successful ones, they don't have TVs in their living room. They'll have maybe one television off to the corner, but they're not watching TV. They're out, doing business. They don't have time to kind of do that because it just takes so much of your time. But like you said earlier about, the workplace, you know, when people are in that zone in the workplace, they bring these attitudes from being, I don't know what the main phrase would be, but they're internalizing all this negative energy, and then they bring it into the workplace. How do managers, how do they recognize and kind of deal? What would be the best practice if there's a business owner out there and they have, some drama in the workplace?
So oftentimes managers are afraid to address the drama. I have yet to figure out why that is. But as soon as you see that there is a toxic employee or a toxic manager, within the workplace, you need to address it sooner than later, because the longer you let it persist, the greater the impact is going to be on other employees, on the manager, and on the business. So, the first thing I recommend for any business owner is, when you recognize that there is an issue, it's better to address it head on immediately. And so some managers choose not to do that because they're like, oh, I may be crossing the line if it's something personal. I don't want to invade in their personal space. But we as people cannot leave our personal life at the door when we walk into the workplace, and we can't leave our work life at the door when we walk into the house. Yes, we think that's the best way to be, but we're human and we carry that with us. And so, what I do with some of my organizations when I go in and do an overall health assessment is, I first meet with, I do like focus groups. I meet with different employees and different leaders and see if there is some overlapping in what managers and employees are saying. And then I sometimes do what I call an organizational climate. It could be an organizational health survey, and I identify the areas where I think the organization needs to work on, and I generate questions that would elicit responses that will help me better develop a strategy to help them move forward. But for some organizations and some managers and small business owners, initially you may not know what the issue is. So you have to be able to have someone, a third party who, doesn't have an invested interest in your company per se, to come in and be objective in doing an assessment to identify what the deficiencies are. And I don't just focus on deficiencies, I also focus on the strengths and the areas that you're doing very well, because you want that to continue. You don't want to devote so much time on the negative things where you're not giving as much to the positive things that are working within the organization. But just to bring it back to your initial question, if it's a situation where a business owner has a toxic employee, it's very important to deal with that employee head on, because if it lingers, it's seriously going to impact the business.
Okay, so that is a good point, but I want to kind of highlight too on the approach. When you say that you got to, deal with it head on, it's also really important on how you approach a toxic employee or a manager who's trying to handle it. Because, you know, I know that in my background where we had, a couple people on the job that were toxic, causing drama. Matter of fact, there's a couple on my current job right now that's being a little toxic. But the approach, could either, resolve the issue depending on how we handle it, or it could be even more detrimental and cause more problems. So I think that, knowing the right way to approach a situation and also maybe do a little pre-investigation as to why this person is toxic. It could be a working relationship. It could be maybe something going on in their personal life that they just, like you said earlier, just can't leave at the door, and they coming in with it. You know, um, what are your thoughts on, just the approach itself?
So I believe emotional intelligence is something that's truly needed in anyone who is in a leadership position. And so, as you move up the ladder in your career, if you're a business owner or if you're a manager for an organization, how you're able to interact with the people who work for you and around you is extremely important. So, if you're a manager or a business owner who has an employee who is toxic, the the worst thing you can do is make that person feel even worse. The worst thing you can do is attack that person. So it's really about how you approach them, and how I personally approach them, and some of the recommendations I have made is really, I think of it more of a holistic type of session. And you need to separate, one is the issue performance based or uh, personality based, right? So if the person is performing but their behavior is inappropriate, you want to make sure that you highlight their performance as a good thing. Because if you come in talking to a troubled or a toxic employee and you start out with the negatives, you've already put them on the defensive. and you've already put them in a state of mind where they're feeling like, oh, I know what this session is going to be about. It's going to be attacking. You're going to make me out to be the worst person. You're not going to want to listen to me. So it's very important to create an environment where that person feels open to communicate and respect the fact that if they don't want to share, and, some organizations, they have employee assistant programs where, it's okay to recommend that if there's something going on and they don't want to talk to you, the business owner or the boss about, they can go there. But you have to create an environment where the person feels like this conversation is really to help them and not to hurt them. This conversation is one where, as their boss, you're showing that you care about them and you genuinely want to identify what the issues are and see if the issues can be rectified or improved. And in some instances, it can't be, and you're left to removing the employee. But before you do that, you have to address, if this is a conduct issue, why is it a conduct issue? What is going on? Because some people are really good at managing up. And so sometimes the managers don't even see what's going on, but the peers do.
Mm-hmm.
And in other instances, sometimes the manager sees one person as the toxic employee, but because other people are good at managing up, or maybe because the manager has a friendship with another employee, they may not even recognize that the person you think is the problem is really the victim. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really about how you approach the individual, and that's why in the beginning I talked about emotional intelligence, because that whole interpersonal skills that's required to deal with such a delicate type of situation is very important, because we've seen on the news where people get upset and they come back and shoot up the place and kill people, and that's primarily probably because some of the bosses, in handling the situation and removing the person or reprimanding the person, they really came across very hard and not gentle and caring in their approach. Now, I'm not saying be a softie, but you never know what the individual is going through, and you don't want to be that thing that sets off a ticking time bomb.
So, Nicole, let me ask you a question related to that. Okay, do you think that organizations today are implementing what they used to do this years ago? I would say more than 10 years ago. Is that, when they have somebody who they consider a toxic employee, or maybe the employee thinks the manager is toxic, and they sit down and they have their little talk and everything, do they still kind of maybe do like a training with them to, to kind of get them reacclimated to the organization, maybe have them go over like, the employee manual, or some sort of like that. I mean, I know that years ago they used to do that before they actually terminated someone, or maybe they, I don't know. I don't really see that too often anymore. So, in your experience, I mean, have you seen organizations take that approach?
Uh, Not often. I haven't seen that. What I have seen, though, is when a manager has had a counseling session, especially if it's conduct based, they work with the employee. They oftentimes recommend a mentor or a coach within the organization to work with the employee. And they also give them like a revisit. Okay, so I'm bringing you in for this particular conduct issue, and we'll revisit this in 3 months or 6 months to see how you're progressing. And if you have any issues before then, feel free to come talk to me. And from a performance base, oftentimes more, I see this where managers will recommend certain training, certain
Mm-hmm.
courses. But when it's a conduct issue, a lot of organizations don't have training in place in the organization that specifically addresses conduct type of issues. So I don't see that very often. Now, what I do see more often is the avoidance. Oh, well,
Yes, there's a
maybe
lot of avoidance.
if
Yes.
this person, maybe they'll find another job. And that's why in my upcoming book, I talk about promote up or promote out. Instead of addressing the behavior, the bosses will, I've heard this term a lot, gift the employee to somebody else. Or if the employee
Yes.
is looking for a job and somebody calls for a reference, that boss will make you think that employee can walk on water because they're really trying to get them out of there. But the
Mm-hmm.
problem you create in doing that is, if the person is growing and moving, they're believing that the behavior they're displaying is appropriate because look at me, I'm doing this, but I'm still getting promoted. I'm still moving up the ladder. And so it sends the wrong message. So avoidance does not work, but I do see the majority of managers taking the avoidance route.
Wow. Okay, that is very powerful. Okay, so I want to hit on two things. One, you mentioned, about the avoidance and how managers are kind of like passing the buck to someone else and getting them out of there. I think it's unfortunate because a lot of times, these people are really, like you said, are really thinking that they're doing a wonderful job when really they're displaying the same behavior, not really realizing what's going on. And one of the things I did in the career transition, and I just happened to do one today, was, I was pretty much telling them, about how sometimes managers do not take the time to try to foster relationships. Okay. Because you're spending the majority of your time on the job with these people. And, if you have a rough working relationship with someone, if you're not fostering that relationship, you're pretty much just buying your time until it's time for you to move on. And if managers are not trying to foster relationships and try to pass it on, they're not really being part of the solution. And you said that very clearly in your message that, they're just kind of passing it on and not dealing with it and ready to kind of like kick you out. And one of the startling statistics is that HR managers expect an employee to be rolled out at least 1 to 3 years, which is staggering. Okay, because so nobody is expecting you to spend 3 to 5 years on a job anymore. It's pretty much you're there a year and then you're out. Um, because of the technology and the range of choices that are available, and I think that for an organization that continues to have toxicities and people who are toxic, you know um how successful will that organization be in the long run? I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
So there are those organizations that are going to have those lifers. Those people are not going to go no matter what.
Yeah.
And then, especially as we move more into the millennials being the majority of the workplace, their history, even though it's a very young
Yeah.
history, is that they move very often.
Hmm.
And even as a Gen Xer, I when I'm speaking to next generation groups or doing leadership conference, and even for my own employees, I tell them every 3 years, yeah, either I move or you move.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because a 3 year mark is a really good amount of time to have grown in a particular position, and it's time to go to the next level within the organization
Hmm.
or within your career. Now, that is not applicable for everybody, but I
Hmm.
am under the mindset, but I'm also under the mindset of succession planning
Yes.
because you have people. It's a revolving door in any organization except for those lifers, and most of the time those lifers are baby boomers and a decent percentage of Gen Xers. But you have to have knowledge sharing tools in place, mechanisms in place that allows for the organization to continue to run even if that person, that expert, is not there. What I find some people do wrong from succession planning is that they start at the top and then go down. And as
Yes.
we know, most organizations can run just fine if the head of the organization is out for a month or two or whatever. The people who are boots on the ground where the real work is taking place, that's where you want to start with succession planning. And so a lot of experts may disagree with me, but my research has taught me that you can afford to lose the head and still function, but you don't function well if you lose the people who are actually doing the work. And
Right.
so if they walk out the door, what standard operating procedures do you have in place? What business process model system do you have in place? What knowledge sharing tools do you have in place? And a lot of organizations don't have that. So heaven forbid if that expert fell dead today or decided I'm just going to leave because I've had enough, you've put everything in that person and they're no longer there, and it impacts the business. So I'm not adverse to the move every few years, but I am for make sure you have processes in place that allows the business to continue to function even if people walk out the door every 2 or 3 years.
That is so true. A lot of the businesses that I know of today are, using third party cloud, which I know that's the most popular. Some are using virtual assistants as backups and things of that nature because, they want that liability of, like you said, the resource walking out the door. And then what do you do now? I mean, there's an organization that I know that kind of went through the same thing where they kind of not, they didn't lose the head, but they lost a lot of expert resources, which impacted the business and impacted to a way that they were losing clients. And it was almost, devastating for that organization to go through that. I know that the organization I used to work for had kind of went through that same iteration. And they did what you suggested. They started from the bottom and worked their way up to the top, which made them a little bit streamlined, but they lost a lot of talent along the way. But it's unfortunate because when you're on a job, I mean, it's an investment. It's an investment of your time and your talent and for that organization. And, when businesses do not foster their employees, they spend too much time, avoiding the problem and, they're not being successful. So, I do commend that you put in your book, about how organizations need to do that. That they need to kind of, look at their approach, see how they're dealing with their employees, if they have somebody who is, causing issues, or maybe they need to look within themselves as managers and say, my employees are not the problem. I'm the problem. And how do they deal with that? So when you give these lectures, Nicole, I mean, and you start talking about the responsibilities of managers per se, I mean, what are their reactions? I mean, how are they intaking this information and these recommendations that you're giving them?
Some managers, it's well received, and others, when you bring it to their attention that based on the research and the evidence and the data analysis, you are the problem, they don't
Wow.
handle that well
Wow.
because accountability is very low for some leaders. And some
Hmm.
of the recommendations that I make is for the higher level managers or executives that in their performance, there needs to be a measure, a metrics that will address this very issue because until their bosses are holding them accountable, there is no need for change. You're like, well, I'm not going to be penalized. So what if my employees keep complaining? Because again, people are really good at managing up. So let's say you're a high level manager within the organization and below you there's a lot of toxicity, but your manager above you may never know because you squashed it or hid it at your level. So I'm a big fan of 360-degree assessments. Some
Okay.
organizations are not a fan of that because of the cost. That's usually the
Now
answer
what
is
now
because
what exactly is a 365
so a
assessment?
360 assessment is not
Oh,
just
360.
your boss evaluating you, but it's also your peers and your employees evaluating you. So you know how on your job you have a performance appraisal every year or a progress review every so many months, but
Mm-hmm.
that's just your boss doing that assessment.
Gotcha.
When you have the full 360, your boss, your peers, and your employees giving input, it gives a better picture of what's really going on.
And how does this differ from the Six Sigma type of, processes? Because, one organization I know kind of used that method to kind of streamline their employees. A lot of people lost their jobs because of that. So, I mean, how does that really differ as far as like the method and how they do that?
Well, the 360 can be a part of the whole Lean Six Sigma process of methodology, but Lean Six Sigma focuses more on improving the performance from a systematically approach, and the 360 focuses on more from an individual approach. Is really what I see the bigger difference between the two. But 360 have also been implemented in the whole Lean Six Sigma process because that's one of the tools they use from an overall systematic
Okay.
change management process.
Awesome. Awesome. So if you had to give, you know, let's say everybody who's listening to this podcast, who's a business leader or manager of any level that have employees, and they have a toxic employee or a number of them, or even they recognize themselves as being toxic. What are the three top pieces of advice that you can give them that could potentially help them deal with it, or try to approach it or fix it or resolve it, or whatever it is they need to do to, make it right again?
So I have a philosophy: when you take care of your employees, the employees will take care of the mission. So if you have an employee who's toxic, the first thing I recommend doing is what I mentioned earlier, is having a conversation with the employee to identify what the issues are. Because sometimes we're on the outside looking in, we don't have a full understanding of what's really going on. And so being able to talk to the employee in a very concerning manner to say, hey, I'm here to help you. I really genuinely want to know what's going on. And then trying to develop a strategy to help that employee, get better at dealing with those issues. If it's something that can be done from a professional perspective, it may be something personal, and that's kind of crossing the line. But the first thing to do is to address what the employee address the issue and develop a way to move forward and help that employee be a better employee. Now, if that's not working, the next step, because that's really considered a counseling session, and if that's not working, the next step is a reprimand, and you bringing that employee on notice that, hey, if your behavior does not change, then this is the ramification of what's going to happen if your behavior does not change. And then if it doesn't, then unfortunately you have to remove that employee. But from a leadership perspective, it's important for the leader to be introspective and say, hey, what role am I playing here in this toxic environment? Am I part of the problem? How can I better, fix what's going on? And that's the biggest challenge, getting leaders to recognize that, they are the problem. And I'm so sorry.
No, I think your dog is agreeing with you right now.
He's so annoying. I am so sorry.
No, it's
And
okay. It's okay.
And so the third thing I would do is find out, sometimes the issue is really that the position is not the best fit for the employee.
Yes.
Sometimes you hire a person to do a particular job, but their
Hmm.
skill sets are better suited for something else. And so moving them, testing the waters and moving them to a position that they have expressed a greater interest in may also be lead to a shift. That
Yes.
employee may feel like, oh, my boss is listening to me and I feel valued and they're giving me this opportunity. So, one, have a conversation with the employee to find out what's going on. Two, as the manager, recognize, question, am I part of the problem? Am I really the issue? And three, try to create a solution that's a win-win for the organization and for the employee.
Awesome. Yeah, those, and ladies and gentlemen, listening to those 3 points, really goes back to fostering relationships. We have to get back to doing that. And, many businesses have lost touch because we have so many people just coming in and out of positions. And you said something at the end, which, really, really touches to me, is, the fact that people, you know, really need to recognize if the industry or if they're doing the right job. And that's the same thing I preach about in the career transition workshop, is that you have to recognize where you're best suited. Because if you're working a job that is not your forte, you're doing things that's not making you happy, that's causing you to be stressed on the job, which, and hence that's the toxicity right there, the negativity that's drumming up. You need to get into the right job. You need to ask yourself that, can your skills be used somewhere else in an organization or somewhere else at another company? And I think that once people recognize that, and I think from my opinion about leadership is that, being a business manager myself, I have as well, and I have feelings and emotions that ties to that. So my personal issues that go on should not affect an employee who I'm working with, to cause that person to feel like that I'm the problem. So I have, as a business manager, I have to recognize when I'm the one that's being toxic. So I think all those points you made to those are very powerful, so tell everybody how they can find you. Tell them how they can get your book so they can know more about how to detox their life and detox their organization. Because I think it's really important that men and women of color really hone in on perfecting our business and supporting each other, whether we're managers or employees.
Absolutely. So the easiest way to find me, if you go to NicoleTurnerOnline.com, that will actually, if you click on the consulting tab, it'll take you to my company, my consulting company's website, the OYAT Group. And I can be found on Instagram at Detox for Your Life, Facebook, Nicole Turner Online, Twitter, Online Nicole, LinkedIn, it's Turner Nicole L MBA. I think it's what my name is for the if you just type that in on LinkedIn, it'll bring me up. So, but if you go to NicoleTurnerOnline.com, it has access to all of my social media platforms, and you can connect with me from there. And as far as my books, Detox Your Life, Building a Healthy Relationship with Yourself and Others, can be found on Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes and Nobles. Detox Your Organization will be coming out in the next couple of weeks, and that will also be on Amazon and Books A Million and Barnes and Nobles, Kindle, or you can order it right from my NicoleTurnerOnline.com site if you want a signed autographed copy. But if you have any questions, you can go to that site and send me an email. It'll come directly to me. So I look forward to interacting with other business owners as well.
Awesome. And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, that on each of the bios pages will have their social media information so that you can always refer to it. And, just remember that the whole purpose of this podcast is to educate ourselves in the different areas of business and personal growth, because it is so important of men and women of color that we not only support our businesses, but we also educate ourselves so that we can be a better leader and example for our young folks that are coming up and learning all these things about our profession. We need to kind of get back to doing that because we kind of lost that over time. And Nicole, I want to thank you so much for joining us on this podcast, and I hope that we will do business again in the near future.
Thank you again. It was such an honor to be asked. I'm so grateful, and I can't wait to hear what the other business owners have to share. Thank you.
You're welcome.